When we live in a house, we're just passing through. People have occupied it before us, and others will take our place when we leave. 100 human dramas played out in every room. In this series, I'm going back in time to uncover the secret life of a single house, a Georgian terrace here in Newcastle on Tyneside, where I grew up. Newcastle's changing fortunes have seen it transformed. From a coal-fired city of innovation and industry to a cultural powerhouse with its own unique character. In many ways, number 5 Ravensworth Terrace is an ordinary house. But, as I'll show you, in reality, it's an amazing treasure trove. Delving into the archives, I'll use the personal histories of the residents of this house to uncover an epic story spanning 200 years. We found this incredible piece of evidence.
Yeah, I do remember.
You okay? Yeah. It's a report of a theft from this house. He was convinced that this was the spirit of his deceased daughter. And here on the corner is our house. A fearful stab in the back part of his head. This was obviously a case that scandalized Newcastle. This is the ultimate detective hunt, uncovering lives that weren't recorded in the history books, but through which we can tell a new version of our nation's past, an alternative history of Britain from within the walls of a single house. When we were last in Ravensworth Terrace, Edward and Rose Kerrigan had left, and a family called the Smythes had moved in, John Walter and his wife Florence. One of the first clues we find comes from 2 decades later. They're running number 5 as a lodging house. These are the electoral rolls for Newcastle upon Tyne Central Constituency for the year 1946. 8 people are listed as living in this house. The Smythes are here, John W. and Florence, but there's also a family of 4, the Bells. And in addition to that, there's 2 single men. Their tenants have jobs like shipyard worker and ordnance fitter. Men and women working in Newcastle's booming post-war economy. And there's one more person with them at number 5, their little daughter, Myra. This is a really big collection of photographs of the Smythe family when they were living right here in Ravensworth Terrace. They've been lent to us by a family friend, and thanks to that family friend, we know that this is John Walter and this is Florence. And the first thing that strikes you is just how glamorous they are. John Walter with his bow tie and his hat, and Florence with her furs. They genuinely look like movie stars. They are the picture of a well-off couple. But when we looked into the background of both John Walter and Florence, we discovered that that wasn't always the case. John Walter is a self-made man from a poor Newcastle family. By the time he's bought this house, he's worked his way up the career ladder from machinist to insurance agent. And Florence is also from a humble background. She has over a dozen brothers and sisters, but we have no idea what she was doing before she married John Walter. There's clearly one thing they love spending their money on. This little girl is the daughter of John Walter and Florence. This is Myra. And in all these photographs, she's wearing these beautiful clothes and has these lovely expensive toys. Here's her teddy bear and here's her toy pram. And she looks like a child who wants for nothing. But she's not the only child in these photographs. Time and time again, we also see this girl. And in many of these photographs, she's beside Florence. Now, the family friend who loaned us these photographs helped us put names to faces, but they don't know who this little girl is. So that's got to be the big question. Who is she? We've tracked down someone who might have the answers. Hi.
Hello.
Gordon.
David,
Hi.
pleased to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. Please come in.
Thank you.
Gordon Hickman is Florence Smythe's great-nephew, although they never met. Is the family resemblance quite striking?
Oh, yeah, you can definitely see that. If I put a pair of glasses on that lady there, that was my grandmother, Joanna, yeah.
Really, it's that strong the resemblance?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Were there other members of your side of the family who knew Florence any better?
Joy, my sister Joy, I believe she visited Florrie at some point.
Your sister did come to this house?
I'm sure she did, yes.
So we need to talk to her?
Yep.
Hopefully, Joy can tell me about Florence's past and the two girls.
Hello?
Hi, Joy, it's David here. And I'm talking to you from number 5 Ravensworth Terrace, and I understand you stayed in this house.
Yes, I stayed there when I was about 7. It was absolutely beautiful.
I've got some pictures here of Florence when she was quite young. She looks like a woman who's in charge. Do you know what she was doing before she met John Walter?
Sure, Aunt Florrie went into service. I think my mum said she was a housekeeper for a Jewish family. That was before she married John.
So Florence is someone who'd been in service and then found herself living in this big house with all her nice clothes. And how about Myra? When I look at these photographs, she seems to have quite a lot of toys. She seems to be doted on.
Oh, yes, she was. She was the only child Aunt Florrie had. She went to a private school. Don't think she was spoiled. I think she was well loved.
Let me ask you one other thing. I've got a picture here, it's a big picture, of Florence and another girl who isn't Myra.
I puzzled over that because I don't have any idea who that person is. Definitely isn't Myra.
No, clearly.
No, it isn't. And I can't think of anybody else in our family who looks like that person.
So who this girl is with Florence, that's a bit of a mystery.
It is a mystery.
If Florence's family can't help, I'll have to investigate another way, peeling back the layers to before 1946. The archives reveal that the Smythes married in 1934, and on their marriage certificate, Florence is listed as a divorcee. Her first marriage was to a man called John Thomas Clark, and it took place almost 2 decades earlier. This is the certificate for Florence's first marriage. It shows that she gets married aged 21 to John Thomas Clark, who's also 21, and this is dated January 1918, so the last year of the First World War. In normal times, it tells us, John Clark's profession is coal miner, but 1918 isn't normal times. He's serving as a private in the Northumberland Fusiliers. Now, the First World War doesn't come to an end until November 1918, so John Clark must have had to have come home from the Western Front in order to get married. This document explains why. It's a birth certificate, and what it tells us is that Florence gave birth to a baby girl, Gladys, in July 1918, so 7 months after her wedding, which means she was 2 months pregnant when she got married. My guess is that this smiling girl is that baby, Gladys, the daughter of Florence and John Thomas Clark. But what happened to Gladys, and why did her parents' marriage break down? I've come to the National Archives in London to see what I can find out. I discover he was in the Merchant Navy after the war, and in his records is a photograph. So this is John Thomas Clark. The first thing that strikes you is how young he is. And yet this is a guy who's been through the First World War. He's survived the Western Front when hundreds of thousands didn't. Tucked away in the archives is another document containing an extraordinary revelation about John Thomas Clark. This states that the said John Thomas Clark went through a ceremony of marriage with one Violet Barham on the 27th day of September 1920 and was thereby guilty of bigamy. a really serious crime. Further digging reveals that John Thomas Clark was put on trial for bigamy in Newcastle. That trial might have been held here at the Guildhall, where so many of our residents' lives were changed. Professor Rebecca Probert is an expert in the history of marriage, and we've asked her to look into the case.
On the 2nd of July 1923, the Northern Daily Mail reports that John Thomas Clark pleads guilty to bigamy. And he's not actually the only one on this particular day. There's actually 9 of them altogether.
There's 9 bigamy cases heard in this one court in one region of England on this day.
Yes.
Now this, I guess, doesn't mean that kind of bigamy is just all the rage in the Northeast in the 1920s. There's kind of deeper reasons for these numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. So post-World War I, there's an explosion in the number of trials for bigamy. This is really illustrating the impact of the First World War.
This is about the chaos that people's personal lives have been through during the First World War. People have made all sorts of rash decisions. People have got married very quickly because, you know, life and death. People are dying.
Yeah, absolutely.
The paper reports that John Thomas Clark told the court he didn't believe Gladys was his daughter, and that Florence had told him, "I will never live with you again. You are free to do as you like." But even if Florence had said it was over, the law made it extremely difficult for John Thomas Clark to end their marriage.
Divorce is pretty limited in this period. The sole ground for divorce is adultery. So unless Florence has actually committed adultery, he's got nothing to divorce her on. So if he's fallen in love with somebody else, then the natural thing to do, almost, is to marry her bigamously.
So it's better to sort of be a bigamist, kind of morally, in the way he weighs things up, than to live outside of marriage, to live in sin.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a really strange way of thinking.
It's a very odd way of looking at it, but we can see from the number of people in the dock beside him that it's quite a common one.
So what happens to him in court?
He's sentenced to 4 months in prison.
Is that harsh or was that normal?
It's normal for this period, but judges are really worried about the increase in bigamy.
So they're making examples of people?
Yeah, and they say that quite explicitly in some cases.
It seems likely that Florence either read about the trial or somehow heard about it, because a search of the archives reveals she filed for divorce just days after the article appeared. So she was the one who took official steps to end the marriage. And alongside the petition she filed is a revealing detail about her financial circumstances.
She makes an application to be admitted as a poor person for the purpose of prosecuting a suit for divorce. Now, the financial limits for this are quite stringent. You have to have assets of less than £50 and an income of less than £2 a week. So it's not a generous scheme of legal aid, but it is at least helping the very poorest in society to end their marriages through divorce.
So it shows that Florence really hasn't got very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even with this assistance, there was still another hurdle for Florence to get over.
She has to go to court and give evidence of this. It's not like today where it's all done on written evidence.
She has to stand there in her hometown and say, my husband was unfaithful to me, my husband committed bigamy at a time when marriage is absolutely sacrosanct.
Yeah, absolutely.
So she's quite brave to do this.
Yeah, yeah. It must have been really difficult for her.
The divorce went through in January 1926. So I now want to find out how Florence met her second husband, John Walter. I've trawled the evidence for the years immediately following her divorce. This is the electoral roll for Newcastle for the year 1929. Here is the entry for number 5 Ravensworth Terrace. There's John Walter, and there's his first wife, Mary Jane, then a list of the current lodgers. But if we turn the page to the entry for number 9 Ravensworth, which is this house here on the other side of what was then a synagogue, Who do we find living in the house? We find Florence. She's listed under her maiden name of Sams. So Florence and John Walter are virtually neighbours. In 1930, the year after this electoral roll was taken, John Walter's first wife died of heart failure. After 37 years of marriage, he was suddenly alone. Now, Florence's relatives told me that she was living at number 9 because she was the housekeeper of this couple, the Levensons. The Levensons had lived on the street for generations. They were the driving force behind the Ravensworth Terrace synagogue. And now Florence, a divorcee with a young child, was working for them. So we can be pretty sure how John and Florence will have met. They will have met on this street. They will have bumped into each other. One day they will have got to know each other, become friends, and then maybe started having feelings for one another and finally ended up as husband and wife. On their marriage certificate is a touching detail. Young Gladys was one of their witnesses. This was a second chance for everyone. John Walter, a widower who'd been rattling around this big house since his wife died. Florence, who could leave her job and become the wife of a well-to-do insurance salesman. And Gladys, who had a father figure for the first time. Number 5 was once again a family home. But why is it that Florence's descendants can't identify Gladys? This is a death certificate. It's dated December 1936, and it's Gladys who's died. She has passed away just 18 years old. Her cause of death is acute rheumatism, rheumatic carditis, and chorea, which is a neurological condition which, if untreated, leads to uncontrolled jerking movements of the arms and the face. And with these conditions, the horrible reality is that Gladys's final days will have been absolutely dreadful. And we know that one of the people who was there with her through those final days was John Walter. He's listed at being present at death. And this also tells us that Gladys dies at home, here in 5 Ravensworth Terrace. So Gladys, this girl born in the First World War, who has been brought up in relative poverty with just her mother, she has died just at the beginning of her new life with her new stepfather. Gladys wasn't the first child that John Walter had seen die. His first marriage had produced 4 children, but 3 of them had died in infancy, with John Walter by their side. Now, 30 years later, he would bury another child. What the documents show is that baby Myra was born just 10 months after Gladys's death. I think all of this puts a very different spin on these pictures of Myra, this little girl with her posh teddy bear and her expensive clothes and the swing in the garden, a child who is clearly being doted on. But when she's born, Florence is 41, John Walter is 64. Now that was unusual then, it's rather unusual today. What I think's happening here, and this is just my guess, is that we have 2 people, both of whom have lost children. They've both been through terrible tragedy, and I don't think they're satisfied with just being a happy couple. I think they want to be a happy family. And when they look at this little girl, I think they see not just their most precious treasure, they see their last chance to be that happy family. If we go to 1946 and the electoral roll we started with, the Smythes have a number of lodgers living with them. Some have been there for years, but one couple have only just arrived, John and Ruby Bell. Army records reveal that John Bell had just been serving in the Second World War with the Northumberland Hussars. We've tracked down this photo of him with his regiment. We think the Bells were renting the attic. What this document tells us is that John Bell wasn't the only John Bell living in this house in 1946, because this is the birth certificate for a baby boy born in July of that year to Ruby and John. and he's named after his father, John Robert Bell.
You follow me.
This is that baby today, John Bell Jr., and it's the first time I'm meeting a former resident of number 5.
That's nice.
Hi.
Oh, lad.
John.
Yeah,
I'm David.
that's me.
Good to meet you.
Pleased to meet you.
Should we have a look upstairs to where your parents were living?
I'll have a go.
He was last in the house as a 1-year-old. So this is the room through here that we think your parents were renting and living in, and that you were a baby in this room.
I wouldn't be much room to swing a cat. And my dad being 6'1", 6'2", you wouldn't have much room for to move around.
Yeah, your dad. If your dad was a tall guy, this is.
Dad.
He must have banged his head on this a few times.
Dad was taller than me.
This was a place that your parents knew really well.
Yeah.
But it's a strange thought that last time you were in this room, you were their baby.
Probably I got conceived in this room if the truth was known.
John Bell Sr. was 33 when he moved into the house. We've discovered that he'd recently been in Germany, where he'd been a prisoner of war. And that must have been on his mind as he settled in here. Did your father ever talk about his wartime experiences?
Very tight-lipped. Maybe said once or twice, but he wouldn't get into detail. Like, tell a story of it, you know.
So he'd tell you little fragments about what he'd been through, but never the whole story?
No, he would just say, right, that's it, and that was it. End of story. He says, why bring back memories?
I want to find out what happened to John Bell in the war, just before he arrived at Ravensworth Terrace. What were the memories that he didn't want to talk about? I've come to his regiment, the Northumberland Hussars, to investigate. John's army records show he was taken prisoner while fighting against German forces in North Africa in December 1941. There is an astonishing record of what happened to him, which another branch of his family has loaned to us. These two little books aren't just a record of the Second World War, they're artefacts from the war. They're diaries that John Bell wrote in almost every day of his captivity. This one even contains the tiny little stub of a pencil that John Bell used to record his experiences. It's made out of a cartridge case from a fired bullet. Both diaries are full of accounts of life and of death in the camps. March 1942. Some men here are just skeletons. They are also covered in great scabs through not washing, dirt, and lice. At first, John was held in a camp in Benghazi, in Libya, but he was moved often. Occasionally, food parcels arrived from the Red Cross. Professor Deborah Sugg-Ryan has come to the Red Cross Museum in London, where an example of one of these parcels is still carefully stored.
So we can see, first of all, that most basic of things, tea. And tea would have really kept the prisoners going. When their rations were down, sometimes all they were living on was tea and bread. The parcel would have been a complete lifeline to John, because often he and his fellow inmates were absolutely starving. He talks about men getting down on the floor on their hands and knees and licking flour off the floor because they're so desperate for food.
A few months into captivity, John wrote that he and another inmate had made a blower, a makeshift cooker, which they fueled with scraps of wood chipped from their beds or bits of old boots chopped up.
In John's diaries, there's amazing ingenuity shown in what he was making on the blower, and very excitingly, he's actually left us some of his recipes, and he talks here about queer puds, etc. I have made. Half a packet of sultanas, half a packet of cake powder, boiled for an hour in tins, condensed milk, and jam spread on top. He says this is very filling, but it takes a lot of wood. Having the blower means that he can not only look after himself, but he can look after other people as well. Although he was only a young man, he had huge responsibility as a non-commissioned officer. He was responsible for men beneath him, and he shows great care towards their well-being in the diaries. But ultimately, we know that the blower itself was bartered when things got really, really desperate.
Struggling to survive, home was constantly on John's mind. April 20th, 1942, heard part of an English programme on the wireless. When they played Home Sweet Home, it made the tears come to my eyes. But how did he get from the prisoner of war camps to number 5 Ravensworth Terrace? In January 1945, this diary becomes even harder to read. And that's because at that point, John was sent to another camp, a very overcrowded camp near Görlitz in the far east of Germany. At a stroke, his conditions have been considerably worsened. Russian troops were advancing through Eastern Europe. John's captors wanted to keep their prisoners of war out of Stalin's reach. So they forced around 120,000 Allied prisoners to walk hundreds of miles into Germany on a journey that would become known as the Long March. February 13th. Some Jews come in striped suits, very cold, wish this month was over. Night after night, John wrote down the name of every town they passed through.
I'm very, very clear-minded. It's exactly as it happened yesterday in my mind.
Harry Winter is now 97 years old, and he was on the Long March.
Harry, I'm David.
How do you do?
Very nice
Nice
to
to see you.
So, you're one of the last men who survived
Yes.
the Long March, the March of the Prisoners of War.
There's not very many of us left now, no.
It's sometimes called the Death March.
Yes, it was. 1,500 of us started off, about 800 finished. They fell by the wayside and were frozen to death, or the guards shot them. It was minus 35 degrees, 2 feet of snow.
Minus 35 degrees.
Yeah. We had no Red Cross parcels. They hadn't come through. So we had to march without any food at all. One morning, we were walking through the village, and a German woman came out and saw us, and she got brought a bucket of water out. And I think she brought out some bread or something, and they all crowded round her, and they trampled her to death. And they were so hungry, and they fighting each other.
And how were you expected to survive?
We were just forced. If we stayed there, we were liable to be shot. If we didn't keep going, we wouldn't see home. And that was in our mind all the time.
On the 10th of April, after walking 500 kilometres in 54 days, John collapsed in a ditch near Goslar in Germany. He was found by American soldiers who transferred him to a hospital train, and on the 27th of April he arrived back in Newcastle. His return made the local newspaper. He is quoted as saying, "The march was hell." Harry, meanwhile, was freed by Russian forces and made his way home.
John Bell writes, "Home at last, I never thought I'd make it."
Well, of course.
You've been through that experience.
Yes.
What was it like emotionally?
Just relief, and to think, well, I can do as I like again now. I feel free.
When you arrive after VE Day, were people interested in what you'd been through?
Slightly, yes, but after a while it just faded away. You went back to work, you got back to, as you say, normal sort of life, yeah.
John Bell got home from the Long March 2 weeks before VE Day. Family legend has it that it was on that day that he met the woman who would soon move into 5 Ravensworth Terrace and have a baby with him. Ruby Long, seen here in later life. Ruby had spent the war in England. She'd enlisted in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the ATS, but after a year had left to marry a serviceman. And when she met John Bell and set up home with him, she was still married to her first husband.
What this means is that, exactly like Florence Smythe, her wartime marriage hadn't worked out.
Perhaps Florence and Ruby, landlady and lodger, talked about how their lives had been shaped in very similar ways by two wars 2 decades apart.
If you want to get a picture of how those two wars messed up people's lives and messed up their relationships, what was happening in this one house in Newcastle tells us a lot about what was happening up and down the country.
Like the First, the Second World War had a devastating effect on relationships. So many people met other partners in the war that the army actually provided assistance to servicemen who wanted to get a divorce. And in 1947, the divorce rate spiked, reaching levels that wouldn't be surpassed until the early 1970s. As Ruby and her new partner John moved into this house, they were among thousands of people starting again in new relationships. But it can't have been easy to put the past behind them.
What I want to try to understand is how John Bell makes the adjustment from war to peace after everything that he'd been through. Well, incredibly, he tells us how, and he tells us how in his own words, because since we started making this series, a third diary has come to light.
It belongs to another of John Bell's relatives.
And this is different from John Bell's 2 wartime diaries. This was written after the war. And what he did was he took passages from these diaries, he copied them out again, and he added in details that he hadn't recorded at the time. And the reason that he does this, he tells us, is because he hopes that this book will help him to remember to be thankful to God for the things I have and to appreciate life more. For I now know that things can always be a lot worse. And it is the simple things in life that count: a home, good friends, a wife and children. What this makes you think is that it was right here in this attic room that he must have begun his recovery. Because here he had his new partner Ruby, he had their newborn baby boy, and he had a home.
For John Bell, this house must have been more than just 4 walls and a roof. For him, it was a place where he could start again.
There's no place like home.
John, Ruby, and their baby son move out of the house in 1947. The Smythes have no trouble renting out their rooms. In the 1950s, Newcastle's traditional industries are enjoying a post-war boom. Just up the road from the house is the giant Vickers Armstrong factory, where tanks are being made for the Korean War. And shipbuilding is employing thousands along the Tyne. To find out more about the jobs that the tenants of Number 5 might have had, I've come to talk to an old friend, Professor Robert Coles, a historian who grew up on Tyneside. His father worked in the shipyards of the 1950s.
To be a skilled worker with a trade here on this river, in these shipyards and these factories, is to be part of a very special community.
Yeah, it's a kind of brotherhood. The river was organised by trades. So the drillers, the riveters, the fitters, the caulkers, the shipwrights, the carpenters, the joiners, they all bound together. They were not paid a wage. They charged a price to the owner. My dad was paid on every hole he drilled. And he has a little book, penny a hole, depending on how big it was. There's a kind of pride in that, charging a price, not taking a wage. As tradesmen, they could build almost anything you asked for. Nothing here was prefabricated. They could build any ship you liked, but their trades were not just the means of production or subsistence, but they were part of their identity. I mean, when they were kids, they did 7 years training to be a fitter or a driller or a riveter or something. So it was, you know, belted into them, literally, who they were and what they did.
The Smythes carry on renting out rooms to workers until 1959, when John Walter passes away at the house. As the 1960s begin, Newcastle moves to the sound of a new era.
My baby found your place to go, hangs around town at the club of go-go.
Florence, now a widow, gets rid of her tenants. Then, in 1963, she and Myra decide to move out to the suburbs. For the first time in 4 decades, the house is put on the market. The following year, the electoral roll doesn't mention number 5 Ravensworth Terrace at all. So I've come to Newcastle Central Library to see if I can find out who bought it. Here, they have a large collection of photographs from this period. This first photograph doesn't give much away. You can tell it was taken in the 60s or 70s because of the old cars with the old-fashioned number plates. It's winter, it's a classic grey day on Tyneside, but other than that, not very much. But this second photograph is much, much more revealing. On the back of the house is a pretty large sign. One word you can read, it says Goodwill. The other word is half obscured, but it's S-A-L-V-A-T-I and then what looks like an O. So it looks like it spells salvation. We've discovered that the people who buy the house from Florence are the Salvation Army. The army was founded in the slums of London in 1865 to help people in poverty and to spread the Christian message. A century later, when number 5 was on the market, the Salvation Army had over 3,000 officers, running hostels for the homeless, old people's homes, youth centres and even day nurseries across the country.
We are what God created.
The Newcastle Corps still holds a weekly service in town. Bill Irons has been involved with the Sally Army for 70 years, and he's been digging in the archives.
In 1964, Ravensworth Terrace was opened as the Salvation Army Goodwill Centre. We've managed to get some photographs from the archives.
This is great.
The opening ceremony programme said that it was opened by the British Commissioner.
So the big guns have been brought up to Newcastle.
The big guns, definitely. The 2 officers who ran the centre for the early years were Major Lillian Richards and Captain Vera Turner. And that's a photograph of them
on the
steps of the house. Yes.
And there's a plaque that's been attached to the doorway.
Yes.
The Cecil Cochrane Goodwill Centre of the Salvation Army.
Exactly.
The Salvation Army set up Goodwill centres in places where people most needed help. So it's revealing that in 1964 they chose our house. In the mid-60s, Newcastle's post-war boom is starting to slow down. Armaments orders have declined and employment at Vickers Armstrong has reached its lowest point in many years. In shipbuilding, other countries are using new production techniques to overtake Britain. In 1913, British shipyards had made 60% of the world's ships. By the mid-60s, that number was down to less than 10%.
It was a very difficult time. There were a lot of people being paid off and made redundant, and shipyards closing and massive changes, and that caused an awful lot of hardship. There was alcoholism around, there was a lot of brutality, violence in the home, there were people in poverty, people in hunger. We think we've reinvented, hunger and poverty, but it's been there for a long time.
So the social consequences of that deindustrialisation, some of it landed on the doorstep of 5 Ravensworth Terrace.
Yes, very much so. And these ladies tried to help.
Turning our house from a home into a Goodwill centre must have been a huge task. This photograph shows the back of the house, and you can see the whole area has been opened up. This wall has been removed. This one must have been added later. And on the wall, which is this wall here, there's a poster. It reads, Salvation Army, we invite you to join in worship. Sunday 6:30, Wednesday 7:30. and then there's clubs for young people. You can even see, in this wall, you can see the holes and even here the bolt where that poster, that notice board, was attached to the wall. So you get the impression of a place that was really busy and really active. Finding the officers who ran the Goodwill Centre when it first opened has been difficult. But the Salvation Army have helped us track down Captain Eileen Moffat, who started working at Number 5 in 1972. Now in her 80s, she lives in London. This is the downstairs.
Uh-huh.
The very big room that you might remember.
Well, that isn't... Where do you manage to get these from?
We have our sources.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I do remember. Yeah. Yeah.
You seem quite moved seeing this
Well,
photograph.
I mean, it's 40-odd years since I was there. There was always people there. You never knew who was coming in because it was like a community centre and everybody was welcome.
Eileen remembers the layout as being like this. The basement held a communal kitchen and dining room. The entrance to the Goodwill Centre was through the backyard, where there was also a toilet block. The ground floor held the reception centre for Sunday services. The first floor was the living space for Eileen and her major, and above that was emergency accommodation for people in need. You were dealing with people going through hard times in their life and difficult situations. Was there anything in your life that sort of equipped you for that?
Well, I had a difficult upbringing. I come originally from Poplar, in the East End of London, and things weren't easy. But I was fortunate. I had a good mum, not a very good dad. And those times, my dad was an alcoholic, and it wasn't recognised.
And how did you come to join the Salvation Army?
Well, I had a breakdown, complete breakdown, and lost all my hair and everything like that. And there was a girl that I was very friendly with, and she went to the Salvation Army at Bromley. And that was where I came to know God and become a Christian and become a Salvationist.
So given your experiences growing up, did that lead you to want to work when you joined the Salvation Army in the Goodwill Centre?
Yes, it's what I wanted. I just felt that being on the Goodwill was just what the Lord wanted me at that time.
So this really was your vocation?
Yeah, that's right. Different people have different ideas of what God wants them to do, but to help people was what I felt God wanted me to do, and that is what I did, or tried to do to the best of my ability.
This isn't the first time our house has been a place of refuge. In the 1860s, the orphans of the Colbeck family were taken in by their grandmother Mary. In the 1880s, it was a home for destitute girls. In 1914, Grace Eagle sheltered her daughter here after her son-in-law was interned. Now in the 1970s, it's a Goodwill Centre. But for Eileen, it was also the place where she met someone special.
There was an officer who was stationed at the men's social. His first wife died in tragic circumstances. And so the major I was stationed with felt sorry for him and invited him home and, you know...
So he came to Ravensworth Terrace?
Yes. And then we used to go together to the Salvation Army at the bottom of the hill. And then we got married.
So it was walking between the Salvation Centre and Ravensworth Terrace on the Westgate Road that you got to know the man who'd be your husband?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So it was a really important period in your life being at Ravensworth Terrace?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
Changed your life?
Yeah. I left to get married.
Eileen and her husband David leave Newcastle in 1974. Just as the Goodwill Centre at number 5 Ravensworth Terrace is about to enter its busiest years. At the time, my family were living just across the river, and it's a period I recall vividly. When I was growing up, this was the view that we had from our house here in Gateshead on the south side of the town over towards Newcastle. And as well as the view, what I really remember from my childhood is a sound, the sound of industrial Newcastle waking up each morning, the heavy rumbling, scraping sound of factories and shipyards and engineering plants kind of whirring into life. And then through the 70s and through the 80s, year by year, that sound got quieter and quieter as one by one, the factories and the industrial plants began to close down. And each day I would go to school and we would be taught industrial drawing and metalwork. We were being trained for industries that were dying. And it was a really frightening time to be growing up here, to be living in this city, because what the future was totally uncertain.
In the late 70s, a bitter recession hits. Employment on Tyneside falls by 11%, twice the national rate. These photographs were taken in the streets around our house between 1979 and 1981. Newcastle-born photographer Tish Murtha set out to capture the impact of the job losses on the city's young people. Just at this very moment, the Salvation Army is going through a reorganisation. They decide to shut up shop and leave our house at number 5. 20 years after it was last on the market, the house is looking for a new owner. But this time, it's a hard sell. No longer a home, 5 Ravensworth Terrace is an institution. After 160 years of helping other people, our house now needs help. Run down, falling down, who on earth would take it on? There was one person prepared to take on the challenge, and he lived just yards away.
I stood in this window and took this photograph. There's number 5. I saw the character which it was sort of communicating, and so that's the house I set my eyes on.
In 1981, Ian Bino was 30 years old. Recently arrived from Birmingham, he was renting a flat just across the green.
Newcastle was very exciting for me. And just over the way, through the tree there, a great friend of someone I'd worked with in Birmingham lived. They said, oh, we've got to come and live on the square, on Summerhill Square. A remarkable place to live.
Ian was a recently qualified solicitor, and he'd moved to Newcastle for a new job. His office was a short walk from the square, and he decided he wanted to stay.
Once you live on Summerhill Square, you never forget what it's like. The house came up for sale in the later part of 1982. It had been a valuable goodwill centre for the Salvation Army, but they weren't using it as that anymore. It looked hard and it looked neglected. It was crying out to have somebody who might just make the mad decision to buy this house and give it another life.
Ian scraped together £15,000 to buy number 5 and moved in 1982. With the help of an expert architect and specialist builders, his first priority was to restore the outside of the house.
Those windows, they look as though they've been there 200 years. They haven't. They've been there since 1985. The house looks as though it's really loved. It's great to be here. Hello.
Hi, Ian.
David.
Hi, very nice to meet you. Come
Same
on
to
in.
you. Thank you very much.
Great. So,
Goodness me.
come and have a look in here.
I'm just looking up there, actually, because I can remember a Christmas Day once picking out that plaster.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a bit sad, isn't it? Christmas Day, picking out the plaster.
The last time Ian was here was 1990.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. What a space. Tremendous.
Ian is not the only lawyer to have lived in the house. The first resident we investigated, back in the 1820s, was the solicitor William Stoker.
But whereas Stoker prosecuted 2 young boys for stealing umbrellas from the hallway, Ian had a very different focus: legal aid.
And we were working in areas of law and practice such as crime, housing, care proceedings. It was a job that sometimes felt as though it was taking over your life. In the 80s was a very, very tough time for the northeast of Tyneside. The individuals that one acted for, they'd often been given a bad hand, money starting from poverty, and all that goes with that.
The legal aid system Ian worked in had its roots in the scheme that had helped Florence Smythe back in the 1920s. By the 70s and 80s, it had been dramatically expanded. Ian was swamped with work, and all the while, he was living in a building site.
You must have at times come home and thought, what have I done?
Yes, but you don't dwell on those thoughts because they sort of rather, they simply take you to a mood which you can't live with, really.
Ian slogged away non-stop for his clients and worked on the house for several years. Doors, windows and original features were all replicated in meticulous detail. Then, before the renovations were complete, he made a big decision.
You know, any tough job, it does take its toll emotionally. In 1987, I began to realise that I couldn't probably sustain a career in that sort of legal aid practice. And although I'd love doing it, my long-term future probably was in a different form of career, associated with the law and with legal cases, but in a different way.
And did that mean leaving Newcastle?
Well, sadly it did. There was a heaviness of the heart leaving this glorious house. It wasn't just the job in the house, wasn't completed. No, the heaviness was that you leave a part of you behind. And coming here today, you know, I've been reacquainted with the person that used to live here. It's very telling, actually.
Ian sold the house in 1990, with the restorations only half finished. In 1991, Rosa Sturak McCreary moved in with her dad and stepmum. She was 11 years old.
Each part of the house had different atmospheres, and it definitely felt like it had a lot of history. Nice spaces, it felt like you had space. In fact, I know exactly how big that house was because on a Saturday afternoon my job was to clean it, and that's how I earned like my pocket money. On the top floor, which was where my bedroom was, I'd kind of get lost up there for hours on end by myself a bit, you know, playing my music. It was a beautiful place to live and also exciting because it was so close to town. That felt, you know, quite lucky really to be a teenager there.
Rosa moved out in 1996, a pivotal moment in the story of Tyneside.
After years of feeling that things were never going to get any better, Tyneside was suddenly experiencing something of a renaissance. Plans were already underway to build this, which is the world's first tilting bridge, which was put in place in the year 2000. And then new cultural venues like the Sage Concert Hall and the Baltic Art Galleries began to take shape. To those of us who lived through the very worst years of the 1980s, it felt like Tyneside was being reborn.
Smack bang in the middle of this action, the house was in the perfect location to attract a new owner. In 2001, it was bought by Jill Goddard Mitchell, who was born and bred just outside of Newcastle.
The house drew me to it. I just needed to have that house when it came up for sale.
Jill was involved in the thriving art scene.
Newcastle at that stage was going through a total revival. And with that revival going on, it was just the time that I revived the house, breathed life into that house again.
Jill completed what Ian had started, giving the house the layout it has today.
I'd never done a job as big as that before, and I thought, there's nothing that can't be overcome. It's stood since 1820. It isn't going to fall over now. It felt like it was a privilege to be in it, and we were all passing through as we do. But I think probably everybody who's lived there through time has put their mark on it somehow. I became part of the house, and the house became part of me. It's true, though.
In 2007, Jill sold the house to Dr. Feyi Awatona, who was working in the NHS.
I think I'm the first African to live and own the house. I come from Nigeria originally, so I'm quite used to spacious, a lot of light in the house, you know. So really for me, the typical house here that will have a lot of light and a feeling of space is the Georgian house. So if you look at this house in particular, you have this welcoming, grand proportions to the rooms. I fell in love with the house.
In 2015, Dr. Awatona put the house on the market, and it was bought by the current owners, Damien and Susie. They've been told nothing of what we found out.
What we've discovered is that your house was built between 1822 and 1824. Here is a document that shows the plans. This is from the 1820s, before they were built. That's your house.
Yeah.
There's your garden.
Yeah.
And here's Ravensworth Terrace.
Okay.
I want to introduce you to some previous residents. Over 200 men, women and children have lived, worked, been born and died in this house. A workhouse doctor, a famous spiritualist, a couple of trick cyclists, a member of the IRA and his associates, a recovering prisoner of war, Salvation Army workers and the community they helped.
What do you feel about your house now you've met the previous residents and you've heard about its journey?
I think going into every room, I'll be thinking, what actions have resulted from things that have been discussed here? And it just shows how there's so many stories and we just come at the end of a long chain.
As we prepare to leave the house for the last time, one of the residents we've uncovered is receiving official recognition.
It gives me great pleasure with the Lady Mayoress to be here to do this. A great citizen of our city, and so with no more ado I will unveil the plaque here at 5 Ravensworth Terrace.
The name of Joshua Alder, a pioneering marine biologist, is being placed on the front of his former home.
I was brought up on Tyneside. My heart is always here. And this is a city that has got in the habit of not remembering often enough and well enough and speaking loudly enough about how important it was. Newcastle is what in the 19th century people used to call a world city. The people that lived in this house shows that we're not isolated. It's a global story. The things that people lived in this house have done have stretched all over the world. Joshua Alder's work is in libraries all over the world. This is a small slice, just within this one house, of a bigger story of a city that had a bigger voice and a bigger place in the world than we sometimes remember. I'm proud to be from Newcastle and to be part of a story that includes men like Joshua Alder and the other amazing people who've lived in this house.